Okay, take two. So we're back. Thank you if you stayed with us. Apologies for some of those technical difficulties just now. Our system told us that we weren't live when we were. So just let's start again. 5 top tips for staff retention in the healthcare and medical sector. I have Stevie here with me.
Hi there, I'm Stevie from Located Locum, and our mission is to mobilise the world's healthcare workforce, and we do that by getting the right person in the right place at the right time. So we have experience working across the optical market, health and social care and pharmacy, and we're really focused on staff recruitment and retention. So hopefully we can share some top tips that we've learned along the way.
Fantastic. And I'm coming to you from Data Plan Healthcare, and we also have Data Plan GP Payroll. So does what it says on the tin. It's payroll for healthcare, as in just care homes, but also the medical sector and GP payroll. And some of the things that we've seen across staff retention and recruitment have come from our experiences with our clients. So hopefully some of the examples of things like horror stories we've seen from our clients can be, can bring some great tips for you guys of what to avoid or what to do in order to retain your staff. So we're just going to start with a little overview of the current landscape. It's no secret that the demand for temporary workers across all healthcare disciplines has increased massively, and that's because of the number of permanent roles that are empty. So, the temporary versus permanent challenges in terms of recruitment and retention, sometimes they can be very similar, sometimes they can be quite different. And whilst, having really good recruitment techniques in place is going to help you to fill some of those roles, what we're going to look at today is really your retention strategies so that you don't have those roles available in the first place. Because it can be incredibly expensive, take a lot of time, and give you quite a lot of disruption amongst your teams to have a lot of churn.
Yeah, and all I would say is, we work in the locum space, and we're seeing this a lot. It's the most candidate-driven market of all time. We actually recently did a survey to care home managers. And what came out as the biggest challenges for care home managers was staffing. No surprise there, and that's kind of what shaped this doing this webinar. So staffing came out as the biggest challenge, and that's kind of led to the answer to this question. We asked care home managers, do they have a good work-life balance? And we got the answer: 54% said no, or said they didn't have a good work-life balance. And we think what this sort of points to is the fact that staffing is the biggest challenge. If there's gaps in the rotas, what's happening is the care home managers are often filling those gaps and having to use time when they would usually be off to fill them. And then that's leading to increased stress and lack of work-life balance. So hopefully these tips that we're going to share are going to help everyone who's on the webinar ease some of the challenges around staffing.
And just whilst we're going through some of these tips, at the bottom we'll be putting up some of the stats that Data Plan, as part of the IRIS software group, commissioned a study with YouGov, where we asked employees of all different sectors various questions, and some of the answers we're going to be bringing to you from the healthcare and medical sectors. And some of the questions were to the employers and some of it was to the employees. And the one that really stood out for us in terms of the employers' responses was 71% of respondents said that they are hiring new staff at the moment, which means there is a massive amount of competition in the recruitment space. And if unless you have a really amazing way to recruit, retention is going to be your strongest weapon, so that you can avoid that process, really.
Yeah, brilliant.
So tip number 1, the first tip that we have talked about, or that we think that is the easiest perhaps even to approach, is clear communication. So, when you've recruited someone, their impression of you starts from their recruitment and onboarding. You set the expectations for communication, and those are really come down to just having a few minimum things in place. So when you have a new employee come through, you need to make sure that they have their contract. You need to make sure that they have their employee handbook, any types of policies that you expect them to adhere to, in terms of letting them know when they should be paid, and then making sure that they get paid on that date. And also just things like making sure that you take their employee starter information in a timely manner, so that you have everything that you need to be able to pay them in terms of their actual, maybe it's a P45 that you asked from them, maybe it's a new starter declaration, it could be bank details, all these different kind of points of information that maybe the employee isn't too familiar with what you need. It's your job as the employer to be really clear about that, so that they feel comforted that you guys know what you're doing, and that they've made the right choice in joining you.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that. I think communication now is more than important than ever. We've seen with COVID that regulations and health and safety policies could change almost at the drop of a hat. So I suppose the question: how do you manage compliance? Like, how do you manage both employee compliance and like what they're up to date with, and also how do you manage your internal compliance and processes, and how do you communicate them? So have a think about that, and like, is there a channel where all your employees know that that's the place to get work information? And by channel, I mean, is there a company intranet or a site, or is there somewhere you hold all the documentation? And how do you get that out to employees? And then what feeds into that is rota and shift requirements can quickly change. So again, with COVID, we've seen this, like isolation's become more prevalent. People can't go into work. So that means there's more gaps in rotas. And how do you communicate these changes? Employees, both the ones who are isolating, will want to make sure that their shift's covered, and also they'll want to make sure that, and also as an employer, you'll want to make sure that the shift is covered adequately. So what communications methods are you using to keep staff informed? Internally at Lookum, we have an app that uses push notifications. So whenever we sign up a health and social care organisation, the staff all get access to an app, so they know that any changes or communication will come through that app. If their shift notifications will come through, and they can accept or decline shifts. So it's really, I say this because it's a lot of people say, oh, we email staff or we send WhatsApp messages, but there's a lot of noise in people's email addresses or email inboxes, and there's a lot of noise in people's WhatsApps. I'm getting sent cat pictures all the time. So I want to have a channel where I can quickly just take in work information and see changes at a glance. I think that's a big thing, having the technology in place to enable you to clearly communicate.
Yeah, and that brings us through to some of what we're going to talk about in the next tip. But just before we do that, this is a really great example of just at a glance having everything that you need to know for what you're about to do.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot of the Locate Locum app. So whenever an organisation signs up, their employees get access to this app, especially temporary employees who might not know the location. Like, the map's very important here, as you can see. There's also the times and the dates of the shift, the hourly rate, and anything they need to be aware of. So if there's a certain skill set or compliance that you would need, and this is just showing you, they can accept the shift by clicking a button, and that's automatically communicates that to the care home manager or the person who's in charge of the rota. So yeah, that's just an illustration of what I was talking about before with clear communications via an app.
And I like that it's really visual as well, because people take in information in different ways, and one aspect of clear communication is being able to tailor your comms so that they can suit all different ways that people absorb that information. So sometimes just having a chunk of data or a chunk of text is actually not that useful for making sure that you are clearly communicating to all of your workforce.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that we've seen with care home managers and the organisations is that we hear this phrase a lot. It's a not knowing that kills you in this game. So whenever someone has a gap on a rota of someone who's got a specific set of skills, what the app allows you to do, and the bank solution allows you to do, is send that to people who are nearby, who are in your bank pool. And then whenever they can either accept or importantly decline the shift. So if they decline the shift, it's they can't work. So you're not just waiting on someone to potentially come back. So that falls back into the communication side. Like a no is sometimes better than a maybe. So I think that's kind of a big thing in the whole communication and retention. So the benefit of that is that you're given a technology platform to all your permanent employees and temporary employees, and it's going to set you apart from all the other people that potentially a bank will work for.
Yeah. Which takes us through to our tip number 2, which is using tech that helps rather than hindering. There are lots of there's so much technology on the market that you could be using. But one of the things that we've seen with clients who have come through to us is that they've spent a lot of money on what they thought was a tailored workforce management system. But actually, when what it was doing was just the bare minimum. For true tailoring, it needs to be integrated so that all of your systems can talk to each other. And that's not just for the benefit of your employees, of your workforce, whether it's temporary or permanent, but also for the benefit of your finance and HR staff, because things can be just as quickly changeable for them day to day as the rest of the workforce. And being able to rely on their technology, that instead of suddenly taking 5 days, it should take 20% of that, or even less if possible. That if you invest in a piece of technology like a workforce management system, but then you have to spend 5 days manipulating that data into another format so it can be processed for payroll, then that's not really helping matters at all. One of the clients that I spoke to a few years ago, they had 7 care homes. They're growing fairly quickly, and they literally, their finance team was spending 5 days manipulating the data from the rota system into a system that payroll could use. And there are 2 things there. Firstly, the rota force system, the workforce system, didn't output payroll ready data, and secondly, the payroll provider didn't accept data unless it was in a certain format. So a couple of things here is that when you've got your kind of plan to use tech, you need to make sure that you've got the right integrations in place. And you should always be questioning a manual task and seeing if there's something you can be doing to automate that, because all of that feeds back through to the employee experience, which ultimately is, that's the goal for retention, is to give a great employee experience.
Yeah, those points are excellent. I think, the integrations point really stands out for me. And, what you should really be looking at the system and saying, well, how much time can this save me? And if it adds on time, then it's probably not fit for purpose. I suppose whenever you're assessing which technology platforms to use, you maybe have to do an equation of like time versus input versus output kind of, which I really like that. And, going on to what the employee experiences, we've our system is across healthcare, and we see a lot of statistics across the employee, and we find now that employees actually want technology in healthcare. They want technology to make their lives better. It is, and everyone's used to it now. It's not the case where everyone's got a powerful device in their pockets at all times, in their mobile phone, and they're used to technology. And it would almost be a shock for someone to go into a workplace and then not have manual or not have automated methods. So, I would be a massive advocate for technology, and I know sometimes it is the fear of almost implementing it is what's holding people back. But, I think by implementing it, you can really sway potential staff and current staff and retain them and make processes easier for them. I would even ask the question to employees, what technology do you think we could use here that could make your lives better? And really get their feedback on it.
And on the flip side, asking the same question from your vendors as well. What else could you automate for me? What other manual processes could be made better? Because if the vendor has been working on this sort of thing for a long time, presumably, depending on who you choose. One of the things that we do at DataPlan is to always interrogate any manual data that's coming through and see what could we do to put it through our software team and change the process for the client so that it's easier. And that's something that seems like it doesn't really have an effect on employees, but actually it really does, because it feeds back through to everything that happens after that.
Yeah, and I think a practical example of this is like we've got the point there at the bottom, and check what simple tasks employees can do. Like the majority of leave is booked whenever an employee is at home, is wanted to be booked. Like you sit at home and you say, oh, do you want to take that day off and do something? If you don't have the ability to go on and book leave remotely when you're not in your workplace, then it's a bad experience. So I would say that that's something that definitely we would almost need to sort of prioritize in terms of technology that can help employees.
Yeah. And just an example of kind of disconnection in terms of what you're communicating to your employees and what you're giving them in terms of tech. It's no use giving them the ability to see their payslip on their phone, but they can't see their rota unless they go onto a laptop. And I've literally seen that example with a client, and none of them, neither the payslip or the rota, could be seen on an iPad, which was what a couple of the employees, they didn't have laptops, and maybe they wanted to look at it a bit bigger, not always on their phone, that kind of thing. So really, looking at the types of technology you're using and just saying, has it been created so that it can be used on all of these different types of tech? Because people use multiple types of tech all day, every day now. There's sometimes I might have an iPad and a phone in my hand whilst I'm in front of a laptop, but sometimes it'll only be one. So you need to make sure that they're available on everything, right?
Yeah, completely agree with that point, Katie. I mean, you have to make sure your technology is responsive, because, like you said, people have a phone on them at all times, but they might actually want the ability to log on in the evening. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. So tip number 3, planning in advance. So one of the things that we find, or that we found with employers, is that if they do what they say they will, then the employees obviously have reduced anxiety around, working for them, and it builds a kind of confidence and trust. One of the stats that we've had at the bottom here is 21% of employees have said anxiety over a lack of communication around pay makes them feel like looking for a new job. Now, that's something that you don't want to be planting that seed of doubt into an employee's mind, because for every time that you don't do something that you say you're going to do, that's another reason for an employee to go and look for another role. And planning in advance with some of the tools that we've talked about are ways to avoid that, basically avoid letting down your employees or workers.
Yeah, and I would sort of follow that up, even planning in advance from a practical point of view, like how far are your rotas done in advance? And if they're done far enough in advance, it means that you're more likely to be able to deal with any unexpected absences better. And it improves shift fill rate. It allows people to book their holidays in advance. And it also it reduces the potential skills gap. So what I mean by this is that, there's going to be, if you've got a specialist care home, for example, you're going to have a certain set of skills on your rota at all times. If you plan in advance and someone then can't make that shift, it means you've got more time to recruit someone with that skill set and potentially use a bank solution to recruit someone. So I think people like to be organized and they like to know what's happening, and it allows them to plan their lives around the rota. We put at the very start, it's work-life balance, which is a massive thing these days in recruitment and retention. So planning in advance allows people to plan their lives around work rather than the other way around.
And I think, with planning in advance, things like having internal deadlines, communicating those deadlines out. So, if there are deadlines for payroll changes or expenses submissions or, rotas or timesheets or whatever, all of those things need to be made really clear. And the only way you can do that is by planning ahead and knowing yourself when that needs to be. If you are a temporary worker and you get an email, 7 o'clock in the evening saying tomorrow at 9 a.m. is the deadline for your timesheet, that's not a great experience for the employee. And even with things like releasing communications or rotas ahead of time, like you said, if you are reducing the anxiety of the employee or the worker, then they'll be happier, and not only will they more likely to be staying with you, but also they'll perform better. Which leads to less issues all around across the business.
Yeah.
So let's go through onto our fourth tip, protection and management of data. So one of the things that, that has a lot of risk around it is using things like shared spreadsheets or network files for, for keeping data about employees. And I think, with the GDPR, there was a lot of, there was a lot of fanfare about it when it first happened in those first couple of years. And most people have sort of settled into it now. But if you are a fairly new employer, or you're growing, or you have had a lot of acquisitions, and sometimes these GDPR risks can creep in again. And, one of the examples that I saw recently was a really big shared spreadsheet for all the different homes within a care home group. And that was recording, all of the hours and information, but also it had sickness in there. But it wasn't just the sickness dates, it was the reason for sickness. Now, your obligation as an employer when it comes to GDPR is that employee data can only be shared with people that legitimately within the business need to be processing that data. So if, there's a care home manager in one site, they have no reason to know the sickness reason for workers within another site. So that is, a GDPR breach, which maybe you haven't even considered as being, because you think, oh, well, they're all care home managers that are looking at the same spreadsheet. But, you really have to look at your obligations as an employer and the processes of your data in terms of protecting it and managing it in the correct way.
Yeah, and I would say, especially for multi-site businesses, if you've got any paper processes and you're thinking about protection management of the data, there needs to be some sort of synchronization across the multiple locations of the single organization. It might be, this is even just a practical example, it might be if you didn't have a paper rota and you had an online rota, you could utilize staff across different locations if there was maybe a gap in a rota, for example. And that's where we talk about management of data. Like, people think of data and they think of lots of numbers and spreadsheets and things, but data is everything. Data is anything you can capture. So by capturing that information digitally, it allows you to sort of develop what you do within your care home or any healthcare organization. And I would say that, I would suggest mapping processes that include capturing of data and see if they can be taken online. So like get a document and just try and work out, can what we do here be moved online? Is there a solution for this in software? Or is there a more modern solution for this? For example, what we see a lot talking to health and social care organizations is some will still use a book to manage leave requests, and that book sits in the duty manager or the care home manager's office. And in order to make a leave request, you've got to walk in and write down on the book. But in the previous page, someone might have made a leave request for the same day, and you just don't see it. And if that process was online and the data was captured of your leave request online or using an app, then it means that there's clear visibility and there's less likely to be sort of a gap in the rota for whenever multiple people have requests at the same time. So even practically, just thinking through sort of scenarios where data capture might be duplicated or might be made in error by using sort of manual processes.
And I think also when it comes to protecting and managing data, there's, it's the probably one of the biggest places where you can maintain trust from your employee. So, I mean, if we take just a really simple example, like an employee joins, you onboard them, you set them up on the payroll. Before the payroll's finished processing, they actually move house and they give you a change of address, but they write it on a paper form, and then it goes to HR, and then it goes to payroll, but it doesn't get there in time because it's gone through all these processes. So then it doesn't get changed, and then the employee's payslip will have an incorrect address on there. But actually, it's not just the employee's payslip that's going to affect. Maybe what then happens next is the wrong address then goes to the pension provider. So the employee's welcome pack from the pension provider goes to the wrong address, and they don't get their welcome packs. So they can't make their selections when it comes to their fund. Like, there are so many ramifications from the smallest example. And
I think if you multiply that out, Katie, say you have an organization with 100 employees, or 100 employees and 50 temporary employees, think of all the opportunities there are for that to go wrong.
Yeah,
and that's what's quite scary. You know, you multiply that out, and it can quickly become really unmanageable.
Oh yeah, completely. And you know, if you're constantly eroding trust, the more that these things happen. It might seem like something really small at first, where they look at the payslip and they think, "Oh, the address is wrong," but then a month later they haven't received their pension information, and then you know it carries on and it carries on. You know, one of the things that we do with our ePayslips platform is an employee can go straight in where their payslip is and change the address. And it will then feed through to HR to click approve, and then that's it. It's changed in the payroll. And you know, that's how many steps taken out and how many options for risk just taken out.
Yeah, I think you know, people might not think of protection and management of data in terms of retention of staff. It might not link together straight away, but whenever you put those live examples in, you can really see how that it does have a domino effect if you don't collect data correctly and you don't protect it.
Yeah, exactly. It's all just about these like microaggressions of their trust, because when they're a new employer anyway, they haven't had time to work out who you are as an employer. So all of these, you know, or they might have been with you for a long time, and these things will then build up. Okay, so let's just go through into our final set of tips. For tip number 5, we're talking about accuracy and values. So quick and error-free payment, that is, you know, I think one of the main things that you need to get right as an employer. So the stat we've got here is that 36% of respondents felt anxious or stressed when there were delays in receiving their pay. And another 13% felt that they didn't trust their employer to pay them the right salary amount on time each month. Now, all of these things, all of these stats and percentages are going to add up to a workforce that isn't really particularly happy about what's happening and wondering why they're working so hard if they're not even going to be paid on time. Stevie, you mentioned that 88% of spreadsheets have payment errors. That's a terrifying.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying, and I mean, there's so many organizations who would still use a spreadsheet, especially a shared one where anyone could really go in and have a bit of access to. So it's frightening, and you know, that's where using a platform really comes into its own. You know, you can guarantee they're error free, and for the employer, I think it just gives peace of mind. And it's not only, it's peace of mind that you're doing your job correctly and you're able to pay your staff who have worked so hard to the correct amount at all times. And like, I think we put the next line down, I think it is catastrophic, and that's a good word, and the impact on retention. I think as soon as you make a mistake, the trust is completely gone. You know, no one likes, like, at the end of the day, you work for your pay, you might love your job, but you also work to get paid. Yeah. And I think as soon as there's an error there, it creates hesitation. Say, for example, if you're a temporary worker and you pick up a shift a month, if you don't get paid correctly for that temporary shift, would you pick a shift up the next month? Probably not. So yeah, that from the temporary side, like, it's even worse than catastrophic. You're just going to lose these people and they're going to go somewhere else. And then from a permanent side, it's probably just going to erode the trust over time, and eventually they're probably going to look somewhere else as well.
And I think, you know, obviously in any sector, people are looking for high performance and accuracy or adhesion to policies or whatever amongst their staff. But, you know, across healthcare and medical, it can literally be a life or death situation if people are not performing at the highest level. And so if you are asking employees to be working at this kind of level, it's really, you know, a part of your values, really, and a little bit of a hypocrisy if you can't do it yourself. You know, if you can't example those things just in terms of managing them.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's where it comes into values. Like you mentioned trust a couple of times there, and that, like, is usually the core value of any organization. So, you know, like, I would even say with your values, you should reflect the values of your employees in order to retain them and recruit them. And so I would ask current employees, you know, what is important to you, and try and get a feel for that. Actually, I mentioned to Katie before we went live that we surveyed one of our large clients, and it turned out that the reason a lot of people stayed not stay, but like to work there was because there was free parking. And it was then something that they then turned around and used in their recruitment techniques. So before, they didn't even mention when they were recruiting that they had free parking, but then it became like a cornerstone of the recruitment ads, and they noticed a big jump in applicants because of the free parking, because they were located in a location where the public transport links weren't great. So like, I think like speaking to your employees and not just guessing about like what actually people want is a really core thing in retention and recruitment. And also that can also reflect on your values. So ask what they want from a company, what is it, and just embed that within your workplace.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to open it out to questions. I don't know if we will get some questions through properly because it didn't link through to the event correctly, but we'll just have a look here and see if we've got anything through.
Yeah, I'll have a look as well, just to see if there is anything.
I have a question here. An example of a situation you've seen that led to a missed pay date. Oh, I'm sure between us, we both have examples there.
A missed pay date. No, I can't think of a specific one. I probably couldn't share a specific one, but you know, I think like we see it a lot. Like people who pre-implement on our platform and almost are recording things manually and have paper rotas and things. You know, there's errors every month. You know, whenever you have a paper rota, when people scribble things out and stuff. So, I can't think of a specific example, but it happens more than you believe.
I actually have one that's super specific.
Okay.
So it was a care home that had like 5 or 6 different sites in different areas, and they had been acquired by a new company. So they had a new company name, new owners, which when they called up BT, who were their broadband providers, to change the name, it caused the contract to be closed. And then it took a while to reopen a new contract and basically connect them again to their broadband. So they were care homes in fairly rural areas, quite far apart from each other and far apart from the head office, suddenly with no broadband. And the systems they were using were, they were not cloud-based systems. So nothing could be communicated outside of the home, like everything had to be done within the home systems. And they literally had to get in cars and drive over like bits of information that were saved onto dongles. It was terrible from the sounds of it, and they had to do that for like 3 months because they weren't on cloud-based systems. So the people that were working on these things couldn't just go home and get on their own broadband and work on it. It was that was a few years ago now, but that was a real nightmare for them. I don't know what, nowadays, I don't think there's no real reason for anything not to be cloud-based.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. People have internet connections in rural locations and things. So, that's interesting. Is there any more through, Katie? I
haven't got anything through myself. No. Have you got anything?
I'm just looking here. I'm looking via my phone via LinkedIn, which is good. I've got someone's asked here. What tips would you give on someone assessing a payroll software? So whenever you look for a payroll software, what would you recommend looking for?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a few different kind of types of questions that we suggest you ask. A lot of them, I think, when you're first starting out, should be around the types of needs you'll have. So look at what you have already, and then look at what the payroll provider would be able to integrate with. Because if you already have things that they can do some work with, then it will save you a lot of money rather than having to invest in all new systems to be able to move to a certain type of software. So I think that's kind of one of the first things that you look at is, what are you using already? What could be then integrated? And then the questions usually that you should be looking at are around kind of their experience of the types of needs that you have, the types of work. If you've got NHS pensions, do they have a link up with NHS pensions? Can they do that work for you? If you've got temporary staff, do they have fast turnaround, high volume types of services? If you've got a rota system, can they take that data and work on that for you instead of you having to manipulate it? I mean, those are just the really kind of high level questions that you start out with initially. And finally, I think being able to pay by backs is a big one as well. I had a client where they went on holiday, but they were the only people that had access to the banking system. So they still had to do 200 payments whilst they were on holiday with a really poor Wi-Fi connection. So things like, a payroll provider being able to pay by backs is huge.
Brilliant. There's one more. Just someone's asking me to explain the app we showed earlier, which is, I think, is the screenshot of the picture. Yeah, screenshot of the app. So essentially this is for health and social care. Located Locum have a bank management solution. So what this allows you to do is attract bank workers, manage bank workers, and pay bank workers. So by attract, I mean we can help you grow your pool of bank workers. And then we use this mobile app to communicate with them. So if you have vacant shifts, we can ping those out to the bank workers by a push notification, and then they can accept or decline them. By the management of bank workers, so for instance, if you have compliance issues or compliance requirements, I should say, it allows you to look at employees' profiles and see their compliance accreditation, so they fit the needs of the shift. And by paying them, what we mean is we can produce a report of their timesheets based on our rota system, and it can go into softwares like Katie's data plan. So yeah, that's really it in a nutshell. But if anyone has any questions about it and wants to see more of it, then we can organise demo or send some resources.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think we have any more questions, so we can finish up for today. If anyone would like a copy of the slides or any more information about any of the tips that we've talked about, any of the softwares or services, then you can send messages to Stevie or myself. And you can also find Locate a Locum and Data Plan Payroll on LinkedIn and send us messages through there or through our websites.
Perfect. Thank you very much for facilitating, Katie. It was a really great webinar, good discussion.
Yeah, good chat today. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.